Thank you. So where should we start? So I guess what the goal we're trying to achieve here is to abstract away the workflow of something being requested, ordered, and the workflow of transitioning that request through to someone fulfilling it, someone actually picking it up, doing it, telling us statuses that they're progressing it along, and eventually completing that request. When we do this in today's ordering system, especially with HL7 version 2, we're very much a messaging paradigm. We create a message payload and we put inside that payload that I'm sending this to this person, and we send it over the wall and hope they do something. With advanced systems, we have statuses coming back saying, I've got your order, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I've completed your order. But what is coupled into that payload is that you've actually hard-coded into the payload that this person is the person I've directed to do the order. So Fire has, with the use of resources, somewhat abstracted that away and really put a line down the middle and said, there is the request that someone wants done, like a pathology request or diagnostic imaging request, which is what your requester authors in a sense. And then there's the action of actually doing that request. And that is the, assigning it to someone and that person picking up that they now have a request to do, consuming it, beginning to do it, and providing status updates about them doing it, and eventually saying, I've completed your task. But Fire kind of draws a line down the middle instead of just putting it all into one big message. So I guess what this revolves heavily around is the task resource in Fire, which unfortunately has a very generic name, which can mean many things to many people. But in the Fire context, and as it says at the top, the task resource describes the activity that can be performed and tracks the state of completion of that activity. It is a representation that an activity should be or has been initiated and eventually represents the successful and unsuccessful completion of that activity. If we look at our service request resource, which is where we say, this is a pathology test of this type. Service request, I should have kept this link open to begin with. If we look at the statuses on service request here, status, you'll note that this is task, not service request. You note that we have these statuses here, which are these ones, and they don't really go into the minutiae of pathology or radiology. Doesn't say collected, doesn't say in lab, doesn't say arrived or booked or image acquisition or any of those things. It's really just about the service request existing. It's in a draft state, it's active, it's on hold, it's revoked, it's completed, it's entered an error, it's unknown. And if we go back and look at service request, it doesn't have a status that has the sort of business statuses for
Angus, could you make that a little bit bigger?
Yep. Does that work?
Yeah, that's a lot easier to read.
Yep. I hope my screen's not too wide too, but I hope people can see that.
Yep. Perfect.
So if you look at service requests, which is where we actually would put the code of a full blood count or an X-ray or X-ray chest or something, but it doesn't really have rich statuses. We have these statuses, but it doesn't have rich statuses that are relevant to the domain, pathology, radiology, or any other domain. And there's no property here that suffices that use. And that is a strong indicator, and if you read a lot more of the Fire spec, that this stuff lives somewhere else, and it actually lives on our task resource. So you go back to task. So here's the task resource, and it has a status. But you'll see that this status is also quite slim. And if we look at all of them, it's draft, requested, received, accepted, rejected, ready, cancelled, in progress, on hold, failed, completed, in error. Once again, there's nothing like collected, booked, arrived, in lab. And the other thing I'll point out is this status is required. We can't extend this. We can't put into here the statuses that we would like to add in. And there's a strong reason for that. And that's because the task is built around a state machine as to how tasks transition from beginning to end. If we go to the bottom of the task resource, there is this state machine. And if you look at these are directly those task statuses we just looked at: draft, ready, request, received. And so Fire gives us this task resource as an entity to represent a task, some generic task being done, and tasks follow through this state machine from draft to completed, or draft through to failed or cancelled, following these steps. But again, no business statuses, right? But if we go back up to task, we do have this status here, business status. And it's a codable concept. So there is no set of codes on it. They're just suggesting a couple. But it's here that we put our business statuses. So it would be here that we define in lab, collected, arrived, booked, image acquisition. And I'd like to think, and not in this meeting, but in time, I'd like to think that we probably do define, for Australia at least, a high level set of pathology business statuses and radiology business statuses. And this is where they would live. But what's important about this discussion today is that workflow revolves around this task resource. And this task resource has a focus to any reference, which in our case would be our service request. So this task would point to the service request that says, do a chest x-ray. It has a for, should probably be the patient. We're doing the task for the patient. And an owner down here, like who is to do this task. And a good thing about this separation is it allows us to change the owner. And this is, a high level requirement we've got here, that when we create orders to do pathology, we might today say, oh, I want pathology lab A to do it, but the patient might go to a different pathology lab. And so we want to change the person who's now going to do that pathology test. And that with this separation in Fire, it allows us to disassociate this task, which was for lab A, from service request to do full blood count, and to reassociate a new task with a different owner for lab B and point it to the same service request that the doctor ordered.
Angus, we've got someone with their hand up.
Yep.
Barty?
Go, Barty. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So service request has a status and then task has a status of its own. So which status is that counts for? Like, is it possible like the service request is in, say, draft and the task isn't requested, or?
Yeah, this service request status is very much about the service request. It's really the status that the doctor in his GP desktop system would be manipulating in a way. He would create a draft order. He would then say it's active. He might suddenly say, no, it's on hold, or he's revoked it. And he might, the doctor himself, once the report is being delivered back to him, then mark his order as completed himself, because he's the one who asked for it. He's the one who decides whether his request has been completed, which is quite independent to the task being done. Can we ask people to go on mute if you're talking? Some children talking. Thank you. Which is quite different to the task, the act of fulfilling the task, which is more the fillers side, so the pathology lab or the radiology side, where they say, I've started your task. Going through these things, it's it's requested, I've received your task, I've accepted your task, I've completed your task. So there is a separation between the fulfiller, the people doing the task, and the people who ask for the task, and they have their own statuses. So I'm not going to sit here and map one to the other, but they are independent of each other. Is that
And I
kind of
guess
makes?
we've got, sorry.
Yeah, Oliver?
Yeah, thanks. Just following up on what you were saying, Angus, I did watch the video, which is quite good. What can happen and does happen, which you've mentioned, is we might request an investigation intending it to be done at a certain pathology practice, but the patient decides to go to a different one and turns up there and says, I'm here for this test, I'd like you to do it. So can that second pathology practice then make the task its own? Because I think the Dutch gentleman talked about ones that were directed for specific providers to do, or ones that were just put out there at large for any pathology practice to pick up. So are we going to have a system to cope with that when the patient goes somewhere else other than where I thought they were going to go, or I intended them to go?
Absolutely. That's in scope. So we still have to work through the exact how, but the clear path we can sort of see is that when an order is first created by yourself and you've chosen lab A, and given the patient a token or the request form, if that patient then chooses to go to some other lab B, then and we still need to work on this, but we believe there'd be an operation that lab B would call. So they would call onto, rather than just lab A claiming the task or knowing about tasks it has to do and doing it, lab B, because the patient has arrived with some sort of token which has been scanned, they would realize that they haven't got a task to do this, so they would call an operation against the order repository to reallocate it, to claim that task, and that operation would probably do something like cancel the task for lab A. So lab A is now aware that the task they had assigned to them has now been cancelled, and then it would spin up a brand new task for lab B, associated to the exact same service request that the doctor created, and now they would progress with their own task to do that order.
So lab B can create its own task. I'm just thinking about Medicare benefits and anybody else who might start worrying about other providers grabbing, tasks that were intended for somebody else.
Yeah, so it would be controlled by the order repository. So lab B can't actually create their own task. They can call an operation and say, I have the token, and therefore I have a right, because I have the token, to transfer the task over to me. So lab A has to be sad because their task has been cancelled. But lab C, who's some other lab, if they don't have the token, then they haven't got the right to transfer the task to themselves. We'd have to look into issues about the token being re-given to you go to lab B and then you walk out with the token still and go to lab C. But we can manage that sort of stuff with the statuses of these tasks. For instance, if a task is in progress because you've presented the token, had it transferred to yourself, and then updated the status to say in progress, like collected sort of thing, then if the token appeared again at lab C, that operation that creates the new task would deny them, because they say, well, hang on, this task is already in progress. You can't now move it to someone else. And look, I am ad-libbing a bit, but this is the sort of vision we can see with task. This is something the technical design group, we over the next 2 years have to work through, but I'm painting the broad picture. Rod Hoskins, you had a question.
Yeah, hi, thanks. As a GP also, like Oliver, just wondering about two things. One, you talked about notification of completion, and I was sort of trying to burrow down onto that one where we've got multiple tests being requested in one request form, if you like, that we complete. And then, at the moment, many of the labs send us a note to say when all of the tests are completed, rather than just sub-tests, sub-parts of that test. As you said, you might have a full blood count and say liver function tests and then something else that takes a bit longer to come back, an A&A test. You might get the first two and then be wondering when is it complete or not, and so some way of notifying that that is not yet complete. The other one I was wondering about is when tests take even longer and may not be the responsibility of the initial laboratory, so send outs for sub parts of the test to a laboratory that has the capacity to complete a test that the first laboratory is not able to complete. So are they part of that system where you can have completion noted on that?
Yeah, so we've certainly thought through somewhat both of these problems. So whilst we've just talked about tasks being associated with service requests, and perhaps if we look at the eRequesting profile that we have this diagram here, which is representing what I've sort of describing. So our service request, it's flipped the other way. So our service request has a task that points to it. And you'll see there's this other construct, which I haven't mentioned yet, called a request group. And so, sorry, these two are both tasks, but they're kind of two different flavored tasks. One is a task to do this request group. And then this bottom one is a task to do that service request. So this is that grouping coming in that you just described. So the group might be a full blood count and a liver functions test. So that would be one request group. It would have two request tasks, one for full blood count, one for liver functions test, which point to two service requests, one for full blood count, one for liver functions. And those service requests are part of a request group. So in a way, if I drew a line down the middle here, on the left, we have a request group. You could almost think of that as a request form, one request form. And that one request form has many service requests, the actual items on the request form, liver function, full blood count. And then this line I'm drawing down the middle is we then task owners or labs to do the request group and the items on it. This means that you have that granularity of, each item has a task and the group also has a task. There's still complications about, one request group just suddenly being split off, this sort of concept of maybe multiple labs all doing parts of the request, which is, I will say, doesn't really happen today. It does in the lab referrals scenario where lab A does not perform this test and does a send away to lab B. But if I put that aside, today it is rare that one request suddenly gets carved up, that I go to Sullivan Nicolaides or I go to Sonic to do the first test and I go to Helios to do the second test and Australian Clinical Labs to do the third test. Whilst in practice that's a possibility, it tends not to happen. The request is handled by one lab. But at a status level, we do have a task for each line item on the request. If I just touch on the send away scenario, our thinking at the moment is that's very much still managed by I'll call it the front lab, the lab that receives the request. It's their responsibility to manage the communication with the GP about the progress of that request, even though in their back end, they're sending it to another send away lab and that other send away lab's doing the test. Eventually that send away lab sends something back to the first lab and says, we've completed it. And then the first lab would then update the statuses back to the GP to say it's completed. Look, there could be a world where the second lab starts updating those statuses. It gets complicated, but initially, at least my initial thought is it wouldn't really change. The front lab would be the one updating the statuses, even though they're sending one of the tests away underneath.
That needs to be very clear then, because you're right. You might end up with multiple notifications, and we do already get multiple notifications from the send away lab as well as the other lab, and sometimes one lab assumes the other lab has made the communication and you don't get any. So we need to make that very clear in this process somehow.
Yep, understand. Yep. So I've stepped to this diagram. I guess
We've got one more hand up, Angus.
Oh, yep. Joe Comey. You're on mute, I think. I think you're on mute.
Must be double mute somehow. It's just not
Is that
working.
better now? Sorry.
That's
Yes.
better. That's better.
Apologies, folks. I had a question because we're about to integrate with a startup that does medical or digital referrals from, say, GP to specialists, and we're more integrated to do the diary and the pricing aspect, but they do the digital referral. Now, in terms of that scenario, you're sitting in your doctor's consult, GP's consult room, and they go, look, we want to, what date works for you in terms of whatever specialists they want to see. We then surface the top 3-5 results on an Uber-like map showing the first consult fee. When the doctor confirms the booking on behalf of the patient, that digital referral is attached and pushed into that specialist, whatever PMS diary that they're using. Now, that sounds pretty complex, that in the context of this and this fire standard, it's sort of, they'd be requesting, would they not, whatever specialist type it is, putting in sort of the postcode or the area, and then searching the availability and generating the digital referral and pushing it in so it's actually confirmed in that person's diary. Now, would that be possible with this
Yeah.
fire
So,
standard setup?
so our initial scope is looking to not include bookings, as in the electronic communications about the bookings. So,
Right.
but that doesn't dismiss the fact that a booking could be made before the request is submitted to an order repository. So it would create complications about the patient has now booked into diagnostic provider A, and then for some strange reason decides to go to another one, and the task claiming by another one, because then you've got this booking problem. But of course, the first guy would know because his task would be cancelled. But I kind of, at least on the fly here, I kind of see that process you described as a happens pre to the creation of the service request and the task being issued to the order repository. And it could happen after, but then you'd have to, like, if you couldn't find a slot to book the patient, you'd have, and you then decide to not do it because you can't find the right time, and you've already sent the orders to the order repository, then you're going to have to cancel that order, and so maybe it would be better doing the booking process up front, going, yep, they're all happy, and then issuing the task and its status and its service request into the order repository. But you kind of have two channels going on there. You've got your booking channel is happening, and then there's this order coming through the other channel. But if this, as people are starting to suggest, if this is a national scope, then it's, are you in the national scope? Are you putting the request into the national order repository, but on the side arranging a booking? And I think that can still work. If the patient then said, bugger that booking, I'm going to go somewhere else, then somewhere else would claim the task. The first provider would be notified that it's been cancelled. They'd have to build a system to then cancel the booking out of their system. If you can associate the two, and you should be able to, there are identifiers for the whole lot.
Well, patients should be able to cancel or even reschedule those events based on their own circumstances, because that's what's giving patients agency, etc., over their health outcomes. To only have medical practitioners doing that is sort of missing the point of where health is going in terms of patients want more control over the decisions, and they are getting better educated. There's still always a place for the doctors, etc. there. But say something comes up they can't attend, isn't it going to be important for them to be able to counsel without having to get onto a phone? We know getting on a phone to counsel stuff or reschedule stuff takes up reception nurses' time, when enabling patients to do it, so that's clear for someone else to fit in, and that slot becomes available because of that. Because then you're sort of missing the ability to be a lot more efficient or drive better efficiencies for clinical outcomes and clinics around appointments and patients coming to see specialist GPs, etc.
Yeah, look, I'll reiterate that we see bookings as out of scope in what we're doing. That doesn't mean it can't. That doesn't mean we can build it to be just blinded. You know, we can't put blinkers on and say bookings don't exist. But we're not trying to build a system that manages slots, times, rooms. You know, and booking systems are very pinned to what you're booking in radiology. You know, you're booking a radiologist, a radiographer, a room with the machine, the times and whatnot for that. Where for a specialist, you know, there are different parameters. So what we're looking at here is just the order distribution. You know, you're putting the order in a repository, another side being made aware of it, and being able to move the order from one to another. Out of band, bookings can occur around that, but we're not building a booking system.
And can I just to, I guess, comment on that from the perspective of the eRequesting project and the technical design group. So that's I guess the proposal for R1. So scope of the first eRequesting bit is what we're working on, is that bookings at appointments aren't in the first release of this. We're coming to those agreements and refinements around the R1 scope. There's some materials on the Confluence page, and we're going to look to talk about that at the next technical design group meeting, and start to talk through the use cases and which parts are we going to work on in the first release, R1, and what do we need to leave out of scope.
And I would highlight, like, there is appointment response in fire. So the fire standard has not ignored bookings. It's just us not going down that rabbit hole at this point in time. I might move on to, I don't know who was first. I think it was Jojo was first.
Thank you. I've got a question following up from Oliver's question about if a pathology or any radiology, the request has a provider or a pathology for lab specified on that. Would it make sense to have, does the model support where there is no provider specified? So the doctor says, I just need you to go and do a full blood count or an EUC, because of Medicare laws, it's within your rights to go to any pathology provider that you see fit. But however, coming back to Oliver's statement about where the doctor has specified that you go to a specified pathology provider on the form, if the patient doesn't go there's some Medicare billing implications related with that. So would it make sense that the requests on the order doesn't have any provider, and that where the patient goes through activates the token, gets to become the defined provider in that model?
Yeah. So again, to Danielle's point, we have 3 high-level use cases that we still need to take through the TDG and all agree on. But those 3 are I'll put them in no particular order. The first one is being we're calling it an assigned order, or at least I am at the moment. So it's assigned to a provider. I've said go to that provider. And then the second use case is a reassigned order. So I told you to go to that provider, but for whatever reason, you've arrived at this provider, and so we're reassigning it to another provider. And then the third case is what you've just described, which is an unassigned order. It's early days, but that's likely to either have a task with no owner on it. So this property I've got highlighted here is the thing that says this task is for this owner. So it may be a task without an owner, or it may be a service request without a task. So it's just floating there, ready to go, but the patient, no decision has been made about where. And that operation that transfers a task from A to B would also claim a task. So you could, to the caller, it's not really, they don't care whether they're asking for it to be reassigned or claiming it. It's kind of the same thing. You're just saying, I have this token, I want this order. And the system would decide, oh, well, it's already assigned to lab A, I'm going to assign it to you. Or it's unassigned, so I'm just going to assign it to you.
Thank you.
David Heathcote.
Yep, if I can find the mute button. I think this discussion is really good, and Jojo, thanks for that that last question. Booking while out of scope for now is something, as a few people like Danielle and Angus have said, is very much integral to what we're doing here. From what I understand, there are already some really good IGs around booking. Is that Argonaut has already done some work in booking, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. But the government see booking as integral in a future state. It's not necessarily an R1 state, but in a future state, we are exploring the idea of booking being the integral patient choice moment for directed requests. So we do need to keep it front of mind. Now, just so we don't freak anyone out, none of this has been locked in. This is just where we as a government team are exploring as a way of ensuring that we're really confident that patients are involved in the choice of provider, where that choice of provider as directed by a clinician leads to better social or clinical outcomes. So, and we do want to preserve that data principle about need to know. So making sure that data isn't exposed unnecessarily to people that don't need to know that. But great questions there. Booking is something we should really keep top of mind while knowing that we're not actually going to attack it in this IG directly.
And I'd add, especially in the pathology context, did bookings aren't made. So we're going to have to work through that too. So whilst there is desires for everything, we can't impose suddenly bookings on pathology.
No, we're not planning on imposing anything right away.
Yeah. Jojo?
Thank you. I've got a question regarding Rule 3. So where 6 tests are ordered from that, how have you managed to solve that technically? Is that going to be a primary identifier with children tests, or do you have, are they going to become sort of individual tests linked all together somehow?
Yeah, so it's certainly on our plate to solve. We have some ideas about it. Certainly service requests, which is where you actually ordered the item. So, an INR, you would be ordering in a service request. We've already, and I believe it's in the profile, we've added an extension for Rule 3 exemption. So a flag you can put on it to say this is Rule 3 exempt. And then we're toying with the ideas that, I'm going to try and find it here. There's a quantity here. Okay. And there's a period. I can't see it in my eye at the moment. Occurrence.
Yeah.
So we're kind of loosely thinking that there would be a task to a service request which has Rule 3 marked on it. It would then have a quantity that could be set to 6. It could have a period saying 3 months, saying you do 6 in the next 3 months. And there would only be initially one task, that's spun up waiting for a provider to do it, to be assigned to a provider. But the token would enable the system to, once the first task is in progress, allow a second task to be instantiated, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, pointing at the same service request. But it is early days, but that's our sort of loose thinking.
I do have another follow-up question for this group, actually. In regards to us transitioning away from paper request to electronic, I was thinking that, are we missing out on any helpful information for the patient or the consumer who currently use a paper request form that we're not able to provide electronically through this model? I'm looking at my own example from ACT Pathology, where we provide locations of pathology collection centres, opening hours, such information that someone who's maybe not familiar with the pathology service can look up and utilize the service to activate or use that request. Is there anything that we're potentially missing out similar by going from paper to electronic? And could those kinds of things be supported as a sort of wraparound in later releases?
Yeah, so of course, if we just start with the allocated request, so one where you have chosen the provider, and this notion of some sort of token that the patient has now, and at at one point that could be no different to the pathology request form we have today. It's just the barcode in the corner is the token, right? So now the form has the lab's information, the collection centers on the back. That's the experience we know today. But of course, as David, and I might let David continue my answer after I've stopped, we've got in scope here this undirected order. So it then becomes a little more difficult or somewhat impossible for all providers or any provider to be providing that assistance to the patient. So they would be doing their own research about where to go. David, you've got your hand up and you might want to continue commenting on that.
I'd
Yeah.
like to jump in and say that because I'm a consumer advocate, and I would say that the paper forms are pretty indecipherable to patients. So they're really just a ticket to go to the collection centre with. And even in terms of information, I think often patients know where they're going to go to without actually looking at that piece of paper.
Yes. Look, I don't think we're ever going to live in a world of a complete digital world here. I think paper is always going to be there. And Angus and Andy have said many times, paper is a hard copy representation of a digital object. It's just a way to find that thing, and it's also used as an implicit way of providing consent for a provider to access your information digitally. However, if we look further forward into the future, this is not an R1 question, but further forward into the future, and we're looking at what's been happening in other jurisdictions, we're going to see health apps start to play a really important role. And when we couple that with things like new provider directories provided by the Commonwealth, we're going to have much better information sourcing and health apps that are going to really support customers who have not made that choice of provider with their clinician to access the right kind of services. And I think when we have requests that have much more detailed information about the type of service that's being requested, and we have provider directories that have detailed information about the services that are on offer, patients will be very well served by those services to match with and find providers, manage bookings, look for availability, and even as someone has suggested in some of the use case discussion, there may even be, in some areas and for some services, a bidding process where people put their need out there and service providers respond to that. So I think this IG doesn't necessarily have to solve that problem, but we do need to keep an eye on the ecosystem of other services that may solve that problem for us.
I'd also add, just I find it's interesting, I have the prompt is a prescription, which is a very generic form. They tend to do this on the back. They staple it. So I find it interesting. So I guess what we're trying to really sort of drive home into people here is this separation of task and service request. So I think for people experienced with orders today, it is very much you create a payload, you send it to the person you want to do it. Here we have these two objects, and yes, they get wrapped up in a payload and sent into a centralized order repository of some sort, but the labs or the fillers of those orders, labs, radiology, they will be looking into that repository for tasks that have been assigned to them. So they can scan for tasks that are assigned to them and then navigate to get the object of the actual request that's being done, and with the understanding that they're two separate things where one can be changed. We kind of see the service request, the part the GP actually orders, is, and I don't want to make this statement concrete, but almost immutable, right? So the GP authors an order for a full blood count and liver functions test with this request state for that GP at that clinic, and then that is locked in and does not change. It can be updated. The GP can change his mind, cancel it, whatever. But the filler, the lab, doesn't really need to change that object. They will change the task. The task will be assigned, unassigned, and statuses will be updated on that task. So at a high level, just sort of that separation. And I know someone's going to throw at me soon that providers will change tests. The doctor says do test A, but they actually do test B. So we're going to have to work through that too. But I'm trying to just recast away from what we do today, where it is very much a payload sort of sent over the wire, and once it's assigned to someone, it's assigned to someone. It doesn't change. Here, the assignment of who's doing it is can be attached and reattached. Andy, did you want to make a comment at all?
I've been making lots of comments, mostly in the chat, the
Right,
questions.
sorry.
No, it's all good. I think we can move on to the workflow.
So should we look at maybe the workflow of task? Where is it? Task. No, wrong one. So maybe we walk through this a little and what we think is going on here. So again, it's all for the TDG to thrash out in the next couple of years, in the next year. But we sort of see this state machine is what's going to drive the flow of orders. So draft would be kind of a status that's out of scope of anyone. It's just the doctor's midway. It's like an order he's created, but he hasn't issued it to anyone yet. It's maybe sitting in his system. I doubt it even goes to the order repository. It's just being worked on. And then we see the order becoming requested. So the order placing system would put the order into an order repository in a status with its task statuses of requested. And that's putting it out to the world saying this needs to be done. And that's a task assigned to someone, or there is no task, or it's a task not assigned to someone if it's unallocated. The lab or radiology clinic or the filler on the other side, they have a number of options here. So they can say received to simply mean I've got your request, but I don't know what I'm going to do about it yet. So they might be now assessing whether they could do it. Certainly in Path and Rad, especially in Path, we kind of almost skip that step. It's like, you give us an order, we're going to do it, right? Like we don't sort of come back and go, oh, I don't know if we're going to do that. But that's fine to move forward in the statuses, right? So you can go from requested straight to accepted, if that's what your organization wants to do. But in other workflows for specialist letters, radiology possibly, you can go through these transitions of you can receive it to say, we've got it, but we're trying to work out what to do. i.e., we might be talking to the patient about a booking. And we might then say, we're rejecting it. We can't do it for some reason, or we're accepting it. So there are that moment, that status where the provider can assess and decide whether they're going to do it, or assess and not do it. And then eventually, it becomes accepted, which doesn't mean it's begun, doesn't mean, it just means the provider has taken on responsibility that they will do their best effort to do this for the doctor. We've still got to wait for the patient to arrive for collection, or there are steps that have to happen before it becomes in progress. So then in progress, in my mind, in pathology, this would be collection. Once you've collected the sample, it's in progress. Note there's no going back from in progress. You can't go from in progress back to accepted, for instance. In radiology, that's probably arrived when the patient arrives for the image for the images to be taken. For other workflows, I can't say. There's an on hold, so we're in progress. Oh, but something's happened. We're putting on hold, and then there's failed and completed. Maybe tube's broken the centrifuge, it's failed. Probably not even that's a good example. But the options are there. And then completed is obviously just completed. To someone's questions earlier, there is still going to be, at least in pathology, difficulty about granularity statuses per ordered item. Like my fungal scraping is going to take 3 weeks to be done, but my liver function test is done in a few hours, right? The model we're proposing allows the statuses to be independent. Like you could say the fungal scraping is still in progress because it's going to take 3 weeks, but the full blood count is completed. But I would highlight there's lots of complications, at least in pathology, about us being able to do that. So it's one thing that the model supports the capability. It's another thing for the fillers, the labs, the radiology clinics to be able to fulfill the capability. So I'm just highlighting that up front. And unless we start getting really strong and in conformance saying you must, but what we're at this stage looking at is a model that supports the capabilities. It's another thing, the vendors being able to fully support those capabilities. And of course, cancelled on the right. So, if the GP who ordered it, it's requested, but for some reason the patient came back and they decided not to do it, they could cancel that up front. There's a point there, so in progress, where in my view, at least in pathology, you're not going backwards. So once you're in progress, usually when it's collected, we're doing it and you can't update it. You can't, change the order once we've collected the samples. David, you have your hand up, sorry.
Yeah, in the use case discussion the other day, you had that scenario where, for instance, a child turns up, freaks out about the needle, and we reschedule it. Is that covered by the on-hold status?
In that scenario, I would say no, because it's getting down to the fine grain of when in collection is it in progress. I would argue that once we have successfully collected the samples, we're in progress. So so unfortunately I don't see a status here to communicate that we tried to, but we had difficulty taking the sample, so it's therefore on hold. I would imagine it's still sitting in the accepted status. So as soon as they got the order, or as soon as it had been booked, say, to the provider, they would have quickly moved to the status of accepted. And then once that patient arrives at their collection center, they wouldn't be moving to in progress until they've successfully collected. So the troublesome child, they would, struggle to do it. They say, maybe we can't do it. They might say, come back next week when we can have another go, or they might reject the order back to the GP, go, we can't collect the samples, child's too upset,
Or the child might end up going to a different collection center, which is highly likely. So it would then be a change.
Absolutely. So it'd be, if they went to a different collection center, they'd present the token there. They'd ask for the task to be, this task for lab A to be cancelled, new task for lab B to be created. They would quickly move it to accepted, and then they'd be trying to take the blood again. And if they successfully take the blood, they'd move it to in progress.
And this is one of the key reasons why service request and the fulfillment tasks are quite separate things. You can certainly have multiple fulfillment tasks that exist over the lifetime of a service request, where you have a patient who may go to one collection center and end up not having a successful collection, so that fulfillment task may fail at that point. You might go along to another one. So you can have many of these things, and each of those records the state of that pathology fulfillment, which, as I say, hopefully it gets to the point where one of them is successful. But even at that point, it still doesn't necessarily mean that the service request is completed, because it really is up to the clinician to go, I got the result. It's as I would have expected. This is what I expected to receive as a result of the test. Well, they might go, something's wrong with this. I want this to be done again. And so it goes out for fulfillment yet again.
I just highlighted here to status reason. So we talked about status. This is the state machine we've been talking about, but there is this property called status reason. So when you move it to a status of cancelled, rejected, there's the ability to provide either a coded reason or a textual reason to say, I've rejected this because unable to take bloods from upset child or something, or and again, there's discussion about, do we create a national codified set of reasons why certain statuses would happen? This can also be textual. Do we just allow free text to, the lab, just the collection nurse gets to write blah, 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 cancelling it? Decisions to be made there too. But there is a clear path for providing context as to why you're rejecting it, or context to any status, why it is in this status. So where should we go to from here?
There's 5 minutes
Yeah.
remaining.
So I guess if we just look at our eRequesting profile, so people may or may not be aware of this yet. We've put links to it on our page. So this is the Australian eRequesting FHIR profile, right? So
Sorry, just a clarification there. It isn't the AU eRequesting FHIR IG.
Sorry, it's draft.
This is the work the amazing work that's been done with Sonic and Magentis that forms the reference into what we're about to do through the AU eRequesting technical design group.
Yes, absolutely.
Angus, are you going to talk about option F?
Yes. So it's in the international R5s. Yep. Thank you, Annie. I forgot about this. So, right. So in the R5 standard, we have patterns, workflow patterns, as to how the ins and outs, the technical workflow of, do we create a task first? Do we then add a service request? What are the steps that happen among these two? So I guess we wanted to socialize that there are these number of workflow patterns. There's F, there's G, there's a set of them in the FHIR standard. And I guess I'm highlighting that to say, we're not, whilst we believe we're going to use task and service request, we're not then just going, we think we'd do this. We're going to follow or pick one of the FHIR workflow patterns and try and stick to it as best as possible. We've certainly, in the work we've done so far, we believe F is the best candidate, but there's certainly discussions to be made here. And as you can see, they're talking through, create the requests, create the task, the filler polls for the task, you go and get the task, you claim the task and act accordingly, create, so it's stepping you through the actual programmer steps of when do I create what and who does what against the filler and the placer. So I highly advise that people have a look at this page. It's a little obscure to find, I find. I'll show you how to navigate to it. So this is the R5 spec. Even though we are building to R4, the R5 spec is more advanced with workflows. So I'd advise looking at the R5 spec, not the R4. And if you go to the main page and click on documentation, on the right here, you've got FHIR workflows. And if you click on this, and this is the trap that always gets me, they're not here, although I would advise reading this page. They're in these tabs here. I always get lost and can't find them. So workflow management patterns is where these live. So I don't think I want to go through them today. We're running out of time, but highly advise people who are interested in this pattern and tasks and service requests to have a read at these workflows, because this is the next layer of detail of like, yes, there are these two ideas, but how do I use them? And this is telling you in step by step, the placer does this, the filler does that. There's also an ad hoc workflow here, which is probably not bad to read. And as I said before, we believe that F is probably the most likely candidate, but it's still all to be decided.
Angus, can I ask, since we're we've not got to that today, and I don't know if that was the plan, is walking through in detail for this group, these workflow, like option F. Is that what we'll cover in the next information session?
Yeah, I suspect so. What do you think, Andy? I guess we'll do a lighter rehash on just what we've done today for the first 10 minutes. And then I guess workflow patterns, starting to at least go through this F1 and maybe look at some of the others. I'm sure that will create some conversation and questions.
Yes.
It's a yes from Andy. Someone's trying to talk. It's very, Phil, I think it's Phil. It's very hard to hear you. Very quiet. No. Heath, you had a question?
More of a comment.
Apologies, I was just
Go, Phil. You go first, Phil. And then I'll go to Heath.
rejoining and it comes on.
I think that isn't a question. So Heath?
Just a comment, as you read these patterns, just what's really important is you look at the pros and cons at the bottom of each of these sections. So the benefits and limitations in particular, and usage recommendations, they're key sections in when determining how we kind of landed on this particular option.
And is that, I guess, what we can go through, because I'm very interested in that as well, in that next session, and why this ended up being what went in the fire IG that you guys were working on.
But to be honest, which of these particular workflows is a little bit agnostic, can be agnostic as well, and especially in the context of our unknown national infrastructure. So this was what Magentis and Sonic implemented based on effectively these usage recommendations, limitations and benefits. But when we have an intermediate tree potentially, or whatever other infrastructure we get to, this workflow may not be where we land in our national solution. So this is more of suits a distributed model, more so than some other models. But that's really, I'm pointing out that this is actually quite a well thought through reference. There are some options that are not documented as well. And it does cover other things like really simple REST. It also covers things like messaging, etc. But hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea of why we've got here for that particular distributed model, I guess.
I think actually we're probably running out of time, aren't we, Danielle?
Yeah, we're over. I have to jump to another meeting soon.
Yep.
I don't know what that'll do to the recording.
Yep. So shall we wrap it up there? But as I think we discussed, I think we'll dive a bit deeper into these workflow options in session 2, which is in 2 weeks from memory.
Yep.
But otherwise, we'll call it quits here. Thank you,
Thanks very
everyone, for
much.
attending.
Thank you,
That was
Angus.
great.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Angus.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.